welcome back to another exciting edition of the Pointless Exercise Podcast. It's time for a movie deep dive with actor-comedian Mike Pusateri. Mike, how are you?
Doing well. Trying not to inhale any smoke from Canada at the moment.
Yeah. We send them acid rain. They send us hockey players and smoke. It's a pretty good trade.
Yeah, and maple syrup. I like their maple syrup.
Yeah. So as we're recording this, we are the 4th of July is a week away, and we got all patriotic. And the movie we are going to talk about today is a musical. That's a first for us. 50 years old, 51 I guess now. 1776. It's a movie where the voice from Knight Rider and the coach of the Carver High School basketball team up to fight off some aliens. And Will Smith... No, that's not right. That's Independence Day.
Yeah.
But anyway. This is a musical that has people in it that you would actually recognize and be like, holy shit, that guy was in a musical?
Yeah, by the way, leave it to us to pick a musical on the Revolutionary War and to pick 1776, not Hamilton.
Yeah, that's right. Well, did you know that when it was a play, musical, still a musical, but when it was in its original run, 1776 was in the Richard Rodgers Theater in New York, which is where Hamilton still is.
Yes, a lot of connections.
If you write a patriotic musical, you have to have it in the Richard Rodgers Theater.
Yeah, evidently, yes, you do.
So I was just asking before we came out because I didn't bother to look it up. Who wrote and directed this thing?
So it was written by a guy named Sherman Edwards, and I was wondering if he was related to Blake Edwards, but it does not seem that he was.
Or is he related to Sherman Douglas?
He may have been related to
Former
Sherman
Syracuse point guard.
Yes, right.
Sherman Helmsley?
Sherman Helmsley.
Oh.
Edward Scissorhands.
James Buddha Edwards and Sherman Douglas put together a musical in their spare time.
Right. And basically, as the story goes, everyone he pitched this musical to on Broadway essentially threw him out of the room. No one wanted to make this thing. They, for a number of reasons, but one of them was they, figured like, well, who's this guy to be writing a musical about this topic? But evidently, he substitute taught in his, I don't know if it's his son's school or somebody's school for a few days. He substitute taught history, so the producers of the show said, "Oh, we can bill him as an ex-history teacher." Wrote this play about 1776.
That's very similar to why the Cubs called up Bobby Scales.
What's that story?
Hey, we called up a substitute teacher.
Okay.
Everybody come see the substitute teacher play for the Cubs. They didn't have a lot going on in those days, so Bobby Scales was the best they could do.
Unlike today.
Actually, I didn't want to tell you. We have a special guest. Bobby Scales is going to come in and talk.
Hey, Bobby Scales.
But you don't want to do it now. You drove all the way in from Iowa. No. Could you take Nick Madrigal back with you? No.
Yeah.
He won't fit. In what? What are you driving? Fine. All right. Bobby's out.
How about a T-shirt, Bobby? Use code DeCipio at Obvious Shirts. Get yourself a 20% off.
So this was a play, and then they decided to turn it into a movie.
Yes.
Which can always be a dicey proposition.
There was like a Hollywood time for that. Where that was done a lot. My Fair Lady, Camelot, lots of movies.
Serpico.
That was kind of a formula. Serpico was a great musical. Who knew Al Pacino could sing? Serpico! And this was kind of the end of that kind of era. Paint Your Wagon was another kind of musical that ended up flopping. There were a lot of flops. These films, including 1776, was kind of a box office flop too.
I'm a big fan of musicals. I just don't like the singing and dancing.
That's kind of my feeling. Yeah, one of the reasons I like this this musical so much is it's evidently this is the musical. This is the longest time that a musical goes without any songs or music in it. So that appealed to me quite a bit.
I would say I like the fact that they don't. There's really no exposition in the songs.
Yeah.
And it doesn't try to do double. It's not dialogue. It's not like dialogue that you have to pay attention to for the. Like you could literally tune out the songs and you still could follow the entire play because
That's what's great.
They're singing about a theme. They're not imparting important plot information while dancing around like a bunch of dandies and.
Yeah.
But some of the songs are pretty catchy.
They are, yeah. And I mean, yeah, to your point, the opening number is called Sit Down, John.
Thomas, for God's sake, listen to me. I've had enough of you, sir. Now listen.
Open up a window.
Will you listen to me and forget the window?
And they just kind of repeat that for a few minutes, and it's just about telling Adams you get the point. Okay, he's obnoxious and disliked. We got it.
Yes.
Everybody's tired of hearing him speak about this topic.
So the musical opens in a bell tower with John Adams looking out over Philadelphia. And the Liberty Bell, as we will come to know it as the Liberty Bell, is up there and is not yet cracked.
Yes.
There's no crack in the Liberty Bell. Apparently, that's the first bullshit in the movie. In 1776, they said the bell tower in what became Independence Hall was not built strongly enough to hold the Liberty Bell. The Liberty Bell most likely would have still been on the first floor, not being rung. So, but it's a good plot device. Let you know right away you're in Philadelphia, and well, they're going to say it 1,000 times in the movie anyway. But it lets you know.
From what I understand, a lot of the movie is factual, but there's a lot of creative license, obviously, that went into it. So, the Liberty Bell existed; it was there, but probably wasn't in the spot where they show it in the film.
So he's up there. He's looking out over the city. You can tell he's a little frustrated, although William Daniels kind of always has that expression.
Yeah.
And Andrew McNair, the congressional custodian, comes up to summon him because he got taking an important vote that they cannot decide without Massachusetts input. And that is whether to grant General Washington's request that all members of the Rhode Island militia be required to wear matching uniforms.
Oh, good God.
So, see, John storms down the stairs, and then I've always liked this line.
I have come to the conclusion that one useless man is called a disgrace, that two are called a law firm, and that three or more become a Congress.
Yes, become a Congress.
And that's where they start. Sit Down, John, which is it's a good first song because you get to see everybody. I mean, we don't know exactly who everybody is yet.
Yep.
But establishes right away that they all think John Adams is a pain in the ass. Yeah, the song even ends up, "Will someone shut that man up?" And he just yells, "Never!
Never!" Yes. And then we learn about, then he and Abigail start to have a conversation. Yeah. That's what happens next, right?
Well, he goes out on the street, and then he sings "Piddle, Twiddle, and Resolve," which has a lot of "Sit Down, John" theme to it. In fact, some of the melody is even the same, and some of it gets repeated. Somebody tells him to sit down. But yeah, that's the first. So they do this device where he's talking to his wife, who's in Braintree, Massachusetts, and you could tell that they're going to use it's kind of like in The Last Jedi, when Ray and Kylo can talk to each other through the Force. That's what they're doing here. He's using the Force to talk to his wife, and the reason we know he's using the Force is they smear Vaseline all over the lens.
That was a
So
technique,
it's
yeah.
blurry, and you can't tell. Like every scene Sybil Shepherd was in Moonlighting, they used the same Vaseline. And so there's a conversation between him and his wife, which they took lots of the dialogue directly from actual letters from between John and Abigail.
Right.
But the big thing they want you to know in this scene is she wants him to come home because Congress isn't doing anything.
Yep.
Everybody in the house has the shits.
Mm-hmm.
One of the kids is turning blue for some reason. Don't know why,
Yep.
but she mentions that.
Sound good.
So they all have dysentery. And then he wants her to get the ladies in greater Braintree area to make saltpeter so they can make more gunpowder. And her complaint is, you didn't tell us how to make saltpeter.
Yeah.
So he rattles off the ingredients, and apparently the one he left out is saltpeter needs either bat or bird shit in it.
Cool.
Yes.
Okay.
He left that part out.
Left that out of the play.
And she tells him, like, come home. It's 300 miles. It'll only take you 8 days.
Yeah. There's a lot of lines like this where, because this originally is appearing before a New York audience in 1969 and runs for 3 years. So you can imagine there was a lot of laughs, like when they start talking about the New York delegation.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of things that would have resonated with the theater going audience at that time.
So he wants her to make saltpeter. She wants pins. Ladies
It doesn't seem like an equal trade.
Ladies
right?
don't have enough pins. Well, according to the extensive research I did,
Yeah.
Pins in that era, they had not invented electroplating yet. So pins were very brittle. And they need them for lots of shit. And because you need them for lots of shit, you broke a lot of them. And if you didn't have them, you couldn't sew. And they sewed all kinds of stuff. I mean, they sewed clothes they wore, they sewed bags, they sewed all kinds of stuff. And they had a pin shortage. So he needed to find pins, and she needed to find some bat shit so she could make saltpeter.
Saltpeter.
In one of the scenes where they show the and it comes up a lot, where they show Independence Hall, you see the White Shadow as Thomas Jefferson, Ken Howard. He's like sitting in a window, and he's sticking his finger out the window. He's licking his finger and sticking it out the window. He's going to give the weather reports, and the weather is a huge part of how hot it is.
Yes.
And it is true, he kept hourly logs of the temperature and daily logs of like the barometer and the wind speed and stuff. And on how hot do you think it was in Philadelphia on July 4th, 1776? This is a whole thing. It's too damn hot in here. They can't open the windows because the flies are going to get in. How hot do you think it was that they were suffering?
Well, I'll say this: they make it seem like it's 102.
Yep, it was 76 degrees. Now I know they're dressed. For some reason they feel they need to dress head to toe in wool,
Right?
which
And
doesn't seem like the smart. How about something that
wigs on.
breathes? A little cotton. If George Costanza was in charge of the costumes, they'd have cotton on. They'd all be super comfortable.
They'd be exactly right, and they'd all have chairs.
Who is the assistant to the traveling secretary of the Continental Congress?
It's
They're
talking
not
to Derek
doing their
Beaton.
job.
Yeah, and they got these dumb wigs on, and they're all wearing pantyhose, like these white pantyhose. It had to be very, very uncomfortable.
I never understood why they dressed like this. Just ridiculous.
Yeah.
According to this note, it must be true. 2 later dramatic interpretations of the American Revolutionary era pay homage to Sit Down John in the HBO miniseries with Paul Giamatti, which is I know Billions is going to have spin-offs, Millions and Trillions. John Adams is the prequel, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, because Paul Giamatti's in
that
it.
makes sense.
Yeah.
That's quite a leap on how he gets to being John Adams to being into S&M as he is in Billions.
In that miniseries, Adams is pacing anxiously during his daughter's breast cancer surgery when Abigail admonishes him, "For God's sake, John, sit down." So that'd be a nice little touch in the thing.
That's nice.
And in Hamilton, Lin-Manuel Miranda paraphrases this line in the song The Adams Administration by having Alexander Hamilton sing, "Sit down, John, you fat motherfucker."
Oh,
So
Ouch. Oh, that seemed a little bit.
it does. Seems a little harsh.
That's a little harsh. One of our second president.
Oh yeah, I do like that in the song that they sing back and forth. She has a line. She's telling him to come home. She said, "There's one thing every woman's missed in Massachusetts Bay," and then he kind of gives her the and she goes, "Don't smirk at me, you egotist. Pay attention to what I say." And that's when she tells him they need pins.
Pins. Yes.
So my favorite fact is about to come up in this next part. So the next morning, we hear John yelling. He's trying to find Ben Franklin. And he's just yelling. And we see that Ben is sitting like in a courtyard, and he's having his portrait painted. Adams walks up, and he's looking over the shoulder of the painter, and he goes,
Franklin, I have been looking everywhere for you. Where in God's name have you been?
Right here, John, being preserved for posterity. Do you like it?
It stinks.
As ever, the soul of tact.
Well, the man's no Botticelli.
And the subject's no Venus.
And then other lines that I like in that are, John is talking way too loud, as always. He goes, "Your voice is piercing, John." And John said, "I wish my arguments were."
Yeah.
With one hand, they can raise an army, dispatch one of their own to lead it, and cheer the news from Bunker's Hill. And with the other, they wave the olive branch, begging the king for a happy and permanent reconciliation. Fat George has declared us in rebellion. Why in bloody hell can't they?
John, really? You talk as if independence were the rule. It's never been done before. No colony has ever broken from the parent stem in the history of the world.
Damn it, Franklin, you make us sound treasonous.
Do I? Treason, eh? Treason is a charge invented by winners as an excuse for hanging the losers.
Oh, well, I've more to do than stand here listening to you quote yourself.
No, that was a new one.
The fact I learned about this scene is, actually, you see it more when they finish up this conversation. Franklin's basically telling John, we got to get somebody else to suggest, to propose independence, because everybody hates you in there, it's not going to go. And he goes, "Never." All right, well, who did you have in mind? And Franklin's like, "I hadn't given it much thought." And just then, Richard Henry Lee from Virginia comes galloping in.
Yes.
Now, so they walk around the corner. Now they're, I think Franklin is literally sitting on it. They're standing in front of this fountain. Do you know what that fountain is more famous for?
Yes.
Oh,
I
you
do.
So I can't blow your
I
mind
do
with this.
know.
But the listeners, we can
You wanna
blow
go ahead
their
and
minds.
Blow the mind for the listeners, yeah.
That fountain that they sat on in 1972 while they were filming 1776 is the same fountain from the opening credits of Friends.
Yes.
The infamous,
Yep,
dancing around to the Rembrandts. And I want to go back and re-edit 1776 so that they should be like the credits. The credits for the movie should be all the characters dancing around the fountain to that song.
Oh, that would be great. Yeah, it'd be hilarious.
That would be great. Now, I should have looked at the guy who plays Richard Henry Lee. Also played him in the musical. So did William Daniels. Ken Howard was in the play. A lot of these guys were in the play.
They brought most of the cast with a few notable exceptions. Yeah.
Won a Tony for Best Featured Actor. And to me, he's the most annoying part of the whole movie. Like, I can't get him off the screen fast enough.
Yeah.
And he won. William Daniels refused his nomination because he was nominated as a supporting player, which seems ridiculous. Because John, if you had to pick who is the main character in this movie, it's him.
Yeah, they could have called it John Adams in 1776, for that matter. Yeah. Right, but he didn't get nominated for the lead for some weird reason.
But he got nominated for supporting and said, "Fuck it."
Yeah, so basically what he said.
I don't want it.
You're gonna nominate me for that? I don't want it.
But now there's two guys that I enjoy the most in this movie. Is Howard Da Silva, who plays Ben Franklin. He is Ben Franklin.
Don't you just?
If I picture Ben Franklin ever, I picture Howard Da Silva. I don't picture the guy from what's Ben on the 20? Yeah.
Yeah. That I know. Don't you just hope that Ben Franklin was exactly like Howard Da Silva?
He's great.
I do. Yeah.
Now, I tell you one person who wouldn't want Ben Franklin to be just like Howard Da Silva, and that was the director, Peter Hunt,
Yeah.
who said that Howard was such a pain in the ass when they directed him in the play that they did not want him in the movie. They were going to use his understudy, Rex Everhart. Everhart is now better known as playing Morris, or Maurice, but it's Morris, in Beauty and the Beast.
That's right.
You know,
That's right.
19 years later.
Well, the story goes too that Howard Da Silva was promised that he would get to direct 1776, the musical, and so he thought he was directing it. And then they brought in the guy to direct it. This guy who ended up doing the movie too, Peter Hunt. And Da Silva was pissed because Peter Hunt really was had very little career. He was basically a lighting designer on Broadway. Had only done, I think, one musical. It was about the Booth family. There's a John Wilkes Booth.
Not David Booth, the old forward from DePaul.
Well, I was speaking of prequels. That may have been part of it. And so he was pissed. And he actually, did you know this? He tried to, before they opened on Broadway, Da Silva was going to quit. Because evidently there was, when they do a Broadway show, they go out of town to work out the kinks. And they went to, I think, Connecticut and Washington. And they went to Connecticut. When they went to Connecticut, they found out they had all kinds of problems with the script and the song, so they had to cut a number that I think took place in a brothel with Franklin called Doozyland.
Doozyland.
This was the name of the number, Doozyland. And they said, we have to get rid of this number. It's just not working. And he was so pissed that they eliminated Doozyland from the show, that he was having dinner with an actor friend of his, that he and this actor were in Oklahoma together. And he was just complaining about this play sucks. I'm not going to do it. It's awful, blah, blah, blah. And the guy evidently said to him, Howard, when we did Oklahoma, you were the dumbest guy I ever met, and you still are. He said, this show is the best show you've ever been in, and this is the best you have ever been. And he literally had to, run down to the theater because his agents were about to tell the producers that he was going to quit. And the producers had hired a replacement actor for him to take over. He was that serious, and he stopped and was able to do the show. And that replacement stayed on as his understudy.
Oh. Ron Everhart. Maybe. Or could have been Carl Weathers, for all we know.
Who knows? There's another interesting thing about Da Silva. Did you know this? On the opening night of Broadway, their opening night, Da Silva had a heart attack.
Oh.
Before the show went on, he had a heart attack in his dressing room, and they tried to, get him to the hospital. And he evidently said, "No, I'm doing this show. If I die on stage, I die on stage, but I'm doing this show." And he did the show, and immediately after the show, there was an ambulance waiting for him. They took him to the hospital, and so he did that show. And then while he was recovering, his understudy went on for him, but had a heart attack, went on. Wow. Now that's a definition of the show must go on. Right?
Yeah, now, he's tough. Oliver Reed famously had a heart attack while he was filming Gladiator, and he did not go on, mostly because he died.
That's some excuse.
Yeah, so he is, and you could see it. He had one scene left, and it's the scene when Maximus. I'm just going to do the whole name, and I can't think of it off the top of my head.
Yeah, Maximus is fine.
My name is Maximus Decimus Meridius, commander of the armies of the North, general of the Felix Legions, loyal servant to the true emperor Marcus Aurelius, father to a murdered son, husband to a murdered wife, and I will have my vengeance in this life or the next.
Is in the jail cell, and there's a riot going on, and you just see it's part of an elaborate thing that's going to help us escape. And Oliver Reed's character needs to like just say one line. He kind of sticks his head right in view, and it's the worst CGI ever. It's just it's sitting there. It's like, holy, what happened there? Oh, he was dead. Oh, well, all right. I guess that's why that was bad.
It's like when they brought Olivia Soprano, not Nancy Marchand, back in The Sopranos after she had passed away. It didn't quite work.
So anyway, back at the fountain.
Yes.
Richard Henry Lee is there now. Historically, in the play he becomes the governor of Virginia. That's why he leaves the delegation. In real life, Henry Lee, his cousin, because a lot of creative name picking in the Lee family. We got Richard Henry Lee. How about just Henry for this guy? That would be became governor, not him. Richard Henry Lee had a, what would it be, great grandson that you may know.
Yeah, I think we do. Yes.
Derek
Robert
Lee
E.
from the Cubs. No, Derek Lee should have won the MVP in 2005. He got robbed by Albert Pujols.
Yeah.
Robert E. Lee. So all one big family. So anyway, the whole idea is they're going to send Richard Henry Lee to Virginia to go to the House of Burgess Merediths, and Carl Weathers and Burgess Meredith. They basically just could have filmed Rocky on the same set.
Yeah, it was a prequel of Rocky. Yeah.
He's gonna go.
Imagine if Sly Stallone was in this movie. Some if he had.
Yo, John. Sit down. Yo, John, sit down.
Yo, Frank.
Sly, that's not it. Sit down, John. Sly.
Yo, John.
Actually, it'd be even better. Just him, no dialogue. Just him chasing a chicken around the fountain in the background. Now, don't even focus on him. He just kind of comes in and out.
Right.
With somebody from the House of Burgesses. You know, you're gonna what is it? You're gonna run like lightning and crap thunder, whatever.
Crap thunder. Let us eat lightning and crap thunder.
Yeah, eat lightning and crap thunder.
You'd just be doing like one arm push-ups in the back of Congress.
or just off in the distance, like you see him on top of a tall staircase with his arms up.
We'd be like boxing.
He's got a knit stocking cap on, but he has this elaborate like Revolutionary War era, like the suit and the high socks. But he's still there's Rocky running up the steps to what's going to be the library someday.
Like that triangular hat on.
So they're going to send Richard Henry Lee to Virginia because everybody knows Virginia is for independence, but they've never bothered to actually like codify it. So he's going to go, he's going to propose it, they're going to vote on it, and he's going to come back, and then that's going to start the ball in motion. And he's going on, he's singing his whole song about the Lees of old Virginia.
But you come to the one colony that can get the job done. Virginia, the land that gave us our glorious commander-in-chief, George Washington, will now give the continent its proposal on independence. And when Virginia proposes, the South is bound to follow. And where the South goes, the middle colonies go. Gentlemen, a salute to Virginia, the mother of American independence.
Incredible. We're free, and he hasn't even left yet.
Then we get a nice. Now they're back at. We go back to the Congress, and it's a nice way to kind of introduce the characters. You need to have you have a new person. They have to introduce themselves to the new person, so then we, as the viewer, get introduced to all these people. And the guy is Dr. Lyman Hall of Georgia, and he shows up, and there's nobody there yet. And he's like, "I thought we started at 10 o'clock." And McNair's like, "Well, they'll start milling in anytime." And then he says, "Oh, here's old Grape and Guts."
Grape and Guts.
That's Stephen Hopkins of Rhode Island, who walks in at 10 o'clock in the morning and demands rum. And Lyman Hall even calls him on it. It's like, "I fear it's a little early in the day." And Hopkins like, "Nonsense. It's a medicinal fact that rum gets a man's heart started in the morning. As a man of medicine, I'm surprised you didn't know that." And then in comes a guy who they mention that he's the youngest member of Congress.
Yes.
And the actor, is it John Cullen?
It's Cullen for sure. Let's see. Yeah.
is not the youngest cast member.
No.
So you could have probably left that line out because we're like, wait, how old is this dude? He looks like he's now.
He's like 45 years old.
Yeah, and that actor is still alive.
Yes, he is.
And the last thing, actually, this is bad. This is what I know him from. He was the grandpa on The Middle. That's what I know. That's what I know him from.
Oh, okay, all right.
But that show only went off the air like 4 years ago, and he's still kicking around. His wife's still alive too. They've been married for like 56 years or something.
How about that?
But that man is Edward Rutledge of South Carolina. Nettie. Everybody calls him Nettie.
Nettie's so cute. Where does Georgia stand on the question of independence with South Carolina? And in John Adams, the Paul Giamatti John Adams, the guy who plays Edward Rutledge is like 16 years old. He looks like he's 16.
Yeah.
He looks like the youngest guy in Congress. John Cullum does not look that young.
And I like, so after he has a conversation with Nitty, and then finally the steward or somebody walks up and hands Hopkins 2 tankards of rum. And he says, well, where'd you go for it, man? Jamaica? Which was the height of hilarity in 1776.
Oh, yes, I love that.
We meet the Delaware delegation with Caesar.
Oh, and it's clear, by the way, just real quick, the 2 tankers are for him. He didn't
Yes.
get one.
Oh, no,
for
right.
the new
No, yeah, he's
delegates
double
from Georgia.
fisting it.
Yeah.
We meet Caesar Rodney, who you may know best as being on the commemorative quarter for Delaware. Do you remember when that was a thing? When every year they pushed out like 4 or 5 new quarters, and they had some on the state. And got the Delaware one. It's like, what the fuck is Caesar Rodney? Well, that's what the fuck Caesar Rodney is.
Oh, okay. What are you doing in Delaware?
And Colonel Thomas McKean, who gets a lot of the best lines in the movie, or maybe not the best lines, but he delivers them the best with that ridiculously deep Scottish brogue.
He's got this crazy Scottish accent.
And then they got a third guy, I didn't bother writing his first name, Reed, who Caesar and Colonel McKean are pro-independence, and the other guy is anti.
Yes.
And so they outrank, every delegation has 3 members, so they have him outvoted. As long as, foreshadowing, as long as they're both there.
Yes, foreshadowing. See, but that's another thing, because when one of them, when Caesar is no longer there, then it's 1-to-1. Why wouldn't they just abstain? Like, why wouldn't that just be a dead? Why is it on a magno?
Well,
New York courteously abstained.
But I mean, we'll get to it was very bad. It was very bad strategy by John Adams and the others. Is that when Caesar had to go home, they had McKean take him. So now neither one of them are there. So now the only guy there is going to vote against independence.
Yeah, if that guy Reed or whatever his name is, have that guy take him.
Right. So anyway, Caesar meets Dr. Hall and asks if he could speak to him in private. And they go out to get privacy, they go out onto the street where everyone is. And he asks if he's a doctor of medicine or theology. And Hall says he's a little bit of both. And he says, which one do you need? And he's like, well, I need the former, but we'll see. I might also need the latter. So Caesar Rodney died of skin cancer. He died of melanoma.
Like Fletch. Melanoma, carcinoma, some sort of melanoma.
He died of melanoma in 1782.
I thought it was 84.
Oh, was it 10 years? I thought it was 8 years.
Point being, well after.
Yes. So
they make it seem like he's on his deathbed.
Yes. So, but anyway, he did die of skin cancer.
Yes. He goes on to become governor, I believe, after this of Delaware.
So the reason for the movie, the reason they go out in the street is then you can immediately pan to a fancy carriage pulling up, and Phil Hartman gets out of it.
Oh, okay. I'm glad you said that. he is absolutely Phil Hartman.
Yes.
Phil Hartman.
The actor, who is that actor?
Donald Madden.
Donald Madden. Joe Madden's uncle.
Yeah.
The way he acts, he's fine. He's a good character. He's a good actor.
Yes.
But the way he acts and the way he's doing very Broadway, he's projecting. It is Phil Hartman acting like a pompous asshole, doing a pompous asshole character. He looks like Phil Hartman. He sounds like Phil Hartman.
Exactly.
He is Phil Hartman.
Yeah. To the point where it's like unsettling. You're like, wait a minute. How did he? No, that can't be right.
It's like, no, he'd have been like 19 years old. He's not in this.
How did he get in this show? Yeah, crazy.
So he hops out of his little carriage and comes prancing over.
I trust, Caesar, when you're through converting the poor fellow to independency, that you'll give the opposition a fair crack at him.
You're too late, John. Once I get them, they're got.
He's followed by another member of the delegation, and after they talk, and Caesar introduces Dickinson to Lyman Hall. Dickinson turns to walk in, and the guy is standing there going,
Oh, Judge Wilson, forgive me. But how can anyone see you if you insist on standing in Mr. Dickinson's shadow?
So it's Judge James Wilson.
Yes.
Who is similarly, he is the third member of the Massachusetts delegation, where Benjamin Franklin is for independence, obviously, and John Dickinson is against it. And then you have Judge Wilson.
Right.
Now it's funny because... Oh, go ahead.
That's an area where they take a little creative license. The actual delegation was like... Pennsylvania delegation was like 7 guys.
Yeah, there was according to this, there would only be 39 members of Congress.
Yeah.
There were upwards of 50 in reality.
Right.
But this fits better on the stage.
It does, yeah. Although Georgia and Rhode Island only seem to have 1.
Yeah.
So
didn't want to spend the money to send more than one person.
It does sound like a budget cut thing.
Now it's funny because then they give Ben Franklin a great introduction, but we've already had a whole scene with him, 2 scenes with him.
Yeah.
But he comes in carried in on a litter, and he gets out. They take him right to his seat in the back of and he's been like the back corner.
Yeah.
And he hops out and he tips the footman.
Good morning, Mr. Wilson. Good morning. Watch where you're going, damn it, over there. McNair, get me out of this thing. Watch out for the foot. Good morning, all.
Morning, man.
Here you are, 2 coppers apiece. Now straight back to jail with you.
And Lyman Hall walks up to him and he goes, he just kind of looks at him, and Ben goes,
What are you staring at? Haven't you ever seen a great man before?
Good Lord, sir. Do you have the honor to be Dr. Franklin?
Yes, I have that honor. Unfortunately, the gout accompanies the honor.
Been living too high again, eh, Pappy?
Oh, Stephen, I only wish King George felt like my big toe all over.
and he's got his foot in like a little green slipper.
Yeah.
And he puts it up.
Elevated on a chair.
Do you know Ben Franklin did not have a doctorate? He had 2 honorary doctorates, and apparently he didn't mind when people, he let people call him Dr. Franklin.
Yeah.
And then we get to see John Hancock, and
his fly swatter.
Yes, he's my other favorite. Like the actor doing the job. I really like John Hancock in this.
Yeah, he's good.
Job. He shows up and he immediately cuts Stephen Hopkins off from rum for 3 days. Because you have abused the privilege, and he takes a tankard of rum right out of Hopkins' hand, and Hopkins turns and he walks back to his seat, reaches down, grabs another one on his way back to the seat. So he's still got 2. And he's Hancock's looking around.
The secretary will read the roll. All members present with following exceptions. Mr. Payne, Mr. Jerry, Mr. Samuel Adams of Massachusetts, Mr. Morton of Pennsylvania, Mr. Wythe and Mr. Richard Henry Lee of Virginia, and the entire delegation of New Jersey.
I'm concerned over the continual absence of 1/13 of this Congress. Where is New Jersey?
Somewhere between New York and Pennsylvania.
Thank you very much.
So Hancock asks if Franklin knows where the New Jersey delegation is, considering his son is the royal governor of the colony. And Franklin says,
Son? What son?
As that title suggests, we are not in touch.
We're not on speaking terms.
Then Thomas Jefferson gets his first line, and he informs Hancock he will be leaving after that day's session to attend to family business. To which Hopkins goes, "Give her a flourish for me, young fella."
And Howard gives him a little knowing and nod and a wink.
And then the secretary, Thompson. They never say what his first name is, but they call him Thompson.
Yeah, he's great.
A real guy who was the actual secretary of the Continental Congress as long as it went on, who then went to work for Thomas Jefferson after that.
Oh, did he? Huh?
For the rest of his life.
Very nice.
But he will continually get a courier will come in and hand him notes, and they are from George Washington.
Sadly, I see no way of stopping them at the present time, as my army's absolutely falling apart. My military chest is totally exhausted. My commissary general has strained his credit to the last. My quartermaster has no food, no arms, no ammunition, and my troops are in a state of near mutiny. I pray God some relief arrives before the Armada, but fear it will not. Your obedient, G. Washington.
Mr. President,
Colonel McKeon.
sure, we have managed to promote the gloomiest man on this continent to the head of our troops. Those dispatches are the most depressing accumulation of disaster, doom, and despair in the entire annals of military history. What?
It's too hard.
I suppose so.
General Washington will continue wording his dispatches as he sees fit, and I'm sure we all pray he finds happier thoughts to convey in the near future.
I've always liked this scene. So then it's probably the same scene, but Dr. Josiah Bartlett pops up from New Hampshire, who's fictional officer, or what would it be? What would you call
descendant.
It? Descendant would become president, a two-term president in the West Wing universe.
Dr. Josiah Bartlett of New Hampshire.
Resolved that for the duration of the present hostilities, the Congress discourage every type of extravagance and dissipation, elaborate funerals and other expensive diversions, especially all horse racing, gambling, and other forms of sinful activity which
They all run out of the Congress like little kids.
Right.
And somebody's like, "Anybody see the fire?" And they point out some house, like, "Oh, the house is brand new." But it's like, "Oh, might be the city tavern." And Hopkins yells, "Bite your tongue, man!"
Bite your tongue, man.
Eventually,
the same thing in the John Adams miniseries. There's a fire, and you see Paul Giamatti scurrying out in the fire. But I guess everybody's running out to fires all the time.
Yeah.
Back in these days. But I think the only purpose of that scene was to give Mr. Lee his entrance.
Yes.
Right?
Yep.
Seems like it.
Then Richard Henry Lee shows up, and he announces that Virginia has passed a resolution for independence. So he proposes it, and Adams seconds it, and the chair, they finally are going to debate independence. Until Dickinson stands up and proposes that the motion for independence be postponed again. Apparently, they've tried this many, many times. It always gets postponed.
Right.
And Judge Wilson stands next to him and says, "I second the motion." And Hancock just sighs and looks at him, and he's like,
Judge Wilson, in your eagerness to be loved, you seem to have forgotten that Pennsylvania cannot second its own motion.
But Reed pops up.
Delaware seconds.
You would, you lousy wart.
Lousy wart.
You lousy wart. Delaware seconds.
So now they need to take a roll call to see if they have enough votes to start the discussion.
Rhode Island. Mr. Hopkins. Where's Rhode Island?
Rhode Island is out visiting the necessary.
After what Rhode Island's consumed, I can't say I'm surprised. We'll come back to him, Mr. Thompson.
Rhode Island passes.
Oh, boy, did they like that joke. Rhode Island passes.
Connecticut votes yay because they were under instruction to support debate of independence once someone other than Massachusetts proposed it.
Ooh, John. Very, very deeply disliked.
New York abstains courteously.
New York.
New York abstains courteously.
New York abstains.
Courteously.
Courteously. Which evidently did happen a lot. They did end up abstaining on many, many votes.
Nettie gets up and says South Carolina will consider it because their good friends in Virginia have proposed it. But they say that until every other state supports it, they won't.
Yes, when a gentleman proposes it.
The new guy gets up, Lyman Hall from Georgia.
Georgia.
Mr. President, Georgia seems to be split right down the middle on this issue. The people are against it, and I'm for it. However, I'm afraid I'm not quite certain whether representing the people means relying on their judgment or on my own. In all fairness, until I can figure that out, I'd better lean a little on their side. Georgia says nay.
So now it's tied. And Hopkins is back from the outhouse. I like that I don't know where his dog goes. He probably just says feet in the thing, but you could always tell he's in the outhouse because his dog is laying out next to the outhouse. They show it like 3 times.
Right.
Hold your damn horses.
Waiting on you, Mr. Hopkins.
Well, it won't kill you. You'd think the Congress would have its own privy. All right, where's she stand?
5 for debate, 5 for postponement, 1 abstention, and 1 absence.
So it's up to me, huh? Well, I'll tell you. In all my years, I never seen, heard, nor smelled an issue that was so dangerous it couldn't be talked about. Hell yes, I'm for debating anything. Rhode Island says yay.
So half the room cheers, and Hancock is so excited he restores Rhode Island's rum privileges.
McNair, get Mr. Hopkins a rum.
But you said he
Get
wasn't
him
to
the
have
whole damn barrel if he wants.
The chair now declares this Congress a committee of the whole for the purpose of debating Virginia's resolution on independence.
Well learned.
So now Dickinson and Adams get into it. Dickinson wants to know why he's so insistent on independence. At one point, he calls himself an Englishman, and Adam responds that they're Americans. And Dickinson hits his cane on the floor to emphasize the syllables in Englishman. And Franklin is like,
Sir, Englishman!
Please, Mr. Dickinson, must you start banging? How is a man to sleep?
Forgive me, Dr. Franklin, but must you start speaking? How is a man to stay awake? We'll promise to be quiet, sir. I'm sure everyone prefers that you remain asleep.
If I'm to hear myself called an Englishman, sir, I assure you I prefer I'd remain asleep.
Oh, now, what's so terrible about being called an Englishman? The English don't seem to mind.
Nor would I, were I given the full rights of an Englishman. But to call me one without those rights is like calling an ox a bull. He's thankful for the honor, but he'd much rather have restored what's rightfully his.
When did you first notice they were missing, sir?
The thing I like about that is everyone laughs, including Franklin.
I love that too.
Like, he
That's
thinks
great.
it's hilarious.
He's tickled by it.
Yes. And Dickinson says, fortunately, the people of these colonies maintain a higher regard for their mother country. Franklin says,
Higher, certainly, than she feels for them. Never was such a valuable possession so stupidly and so recklessly managed than this entire continent by the British Crown. Our industry discouraged, our resources pillaged. Worst of all, our very character stifled. We've spawned a new race here, Mr. Dickinson. Rougher, simpler, more violent, more enterprising, less refined. We're a new nationality. We require a new nation.
By the way, that is a pretty damn good description. You know, that holds up pretty well today.
yes, it does.
Yeah.
And a lot of Franklin's dialogue, especially when it's lengthy, is from stuff he wrote.
Yeah.
So he's very likely actually wrote or said that.
Yes, absolutely.
And Dickinson says, well, that may be your opinion, Dr. Franklin, but as I said, the people feel quite differently. So now Adams says, what do you know about the people, Mr. Dickinson? You don't speak for the people. You represent only yourself. And that precious status quo you keep imploring the people to keep for their own good is nothing more than the eternal preservation of your own property. And Dickinson says, Adams has a talent for making words like property seem distasteful. Dickinson says, why is it always Boston which breaks the king's peace? My dear Congress, you must not adopt this evil measure. It is the work of the devil. Leave it where it belongs, in New England. And arguments break out all over the room. Everybody's arguing with somebody. And they calm down a little bit. And Rutherford asks Adams, if they get independence, who will rule South Carolina? And Adams says, the people. Rutherford wants to know if he means the people of South Carolina?
People of South Carolina?
Or everyone. Because South Carolina wants every colony to be independent of each other. They want 13 separate nations. They don't want... So in reality, South Carolina had been pushing for independence for decades, but not the kind of independence that everybody else was. Mm-hmm. They didn't want a formal alliance with the other, what would become states. They just wanted their own. They wanted to be their own country.
Yeah, united for their mutual defense and protection with the other states, but other than that, completely able to govern themselves. And that's what we will support once everyone else supports it.
And then the man that Adams refers fondly to as Old Bacon Face, Samuel Chase of Maryland, says they don't need to declare independence. If Washington's army loses, they won't pay any price. But if the army wins, we can declare anything we damned well please. And Adam goes on this whole thing about, don't you think an army needs something to fight for? He's going on, and then him and Dickinson start arguing. Dickinson calls him a madman. Adams calls Dickinson a coward, then a landlord. Then Dickinson calls him a lawyer, and as soon as he says lawyer, they immediately start fighting with their canes.
Yes. Boy, but my favorite line is when Adams calls Dickinson, "You fribble!"
Fribble. Yep.
Fribble. First and only time the word fribble has ever been used in the history of American cinema. You fribble.
So now there's people fighting again, and McKean shoots off his gun in the room.
Stop it! Stop it!
His rifle.
Like that.
Fires it into the ceiling. And Caesar Rodney tells everybody, stop.
This is the Congress! Stop it, I say! The enemy's out there!
No, Mr. Rodney, the enemy is here!
No! I say he's out there! England! England closing in, cutting off our air. There's no time! No air.
And then he collapses.
And the actor who plays him is shorter than Nick Madrill.
Yeah.
He's a tiny little guy. When the real Caesar, I believe, was 6'2" or 6'3". He's a very tall man.
So McKean summons Dr. Hall, and McKean tells Dr. Hall that Rodney has cancer.
Dr. Hall.
Colonel McKean. It's the cancer.
But he should go home. A man should die in his own bed. John Adam.
I'm here, Caesar.
I leave you a divided Delaware. Forgive me.
I'll take you home, Caesar.
So with McKean and Rodney gone, Rutledge immediately calls for a vote. And Reed seconds it. The only person left from Delaware.
Right. Delaware seconds.
So Adams is quickly looking to stall. He's got to come up with something. He tells Franklin, think of something. So Franklin, in the ultimate delay tactic, could you read the resolution again? We need to know what we're voting on. Could you read it? So Thompson starts to read the resolution, and a new delegation comes walking in the back of the room.
Yes.
And it is the governor from Benson.
Governor? James Noble.
We do not see Robert Guillaume, but he's not there. He's probably out tying up the horses.
Yeah.
And he goes, "Oh,
excuse me, is this the Continental Congress?" Well, yes, I can see that it must be. It's all right, we found it. We've been looking for you everywhere, you see. Someone told us that you might be at Carpenter's Hall, and someone else suggested Library Hall, and so finally we asked a constable.
Excuse me, sir, but if you don't mind, the Congress is about to decide the question of American independence.
Oh, how splendid. That means we're not too late. These gentlemen are Mr. Francis Hopkinson, Mr. Richard Stockton, and I am the Reverend John Witherspoon. We're the new delegates from New Jersey.
Did you know that the Reverend John Witherspoon is believed to be an ancestor of
Reese Witherspoon?"
Correct.
Yeah, he had a summer book club, and he would take these books and he would produce them and turn them into plays. Oh wait, no, that's her making movies. So anyway, as soon as they find out there's the new delegates from New Jersey, everybody is on them like stink on shit to try to convince them to vote their way. Because they're tied again with Delaware out. And this is nice. He walks up to Franklin. He goes,
"Dr. Franklin, I regret that I must be the bearer of unhappy tidings, sir. But your son, the royal governor of New Jersey, has been taken prisoner and has been moved under guard to the colony of Connecticut for safekeeping."
Is he unharmed, sir?
When last I heard he was, yes, sir.
Well, then why the long face? I hear Connecticut's an excellent location. Tell me, why did they arrest the little bastard?
Yeah. And they would never reconcile, evidently, Franklin and his son. Although Franklin did become close to his grandson, who I think became his secretary, but Franklin and his son, the royal governor, never fully reconciled over that.
I felt bad because his son was playing a Little League tournament in St. Louis once, and everybody's like, "Hey, your dad, Ben Franklin's here," and he was actually there to see a different kid. No, wait,
that was
Chip Carey and his grandpa Harry. Shit. All right, how do you get those? I get them confused.
Yeah, his grandpa Ben Franklin. Harry would have made a good Ben Franklin.
Yeah. Skip would have made a good John Adams.
Yeah. Well, not quite the intellectual heft, perhaps.
So anyway, Adams asks Reverend Witherspoon where they stand on independence. Like, oh, haven't I made myself clear? I suppose I haven't.
No.
We are to vote for independence. That was why they recalled the other delegation and sent them. So now Adams runs to the board and reminds Hancock that as president of the Congress, he has the privilege to break any votes that are deadlocked.
Yes, the chair thanked Mr. Adams for his reminder. Yes, the tally board. Did you know the tally board and the calendar were not in the musical? Those were added for they were added for the film.
Yeah, I knew they weren't real.
Yeah,
the tally board was simply so you could make sense of
help the audience figure out. Yeah,
who was on what side.
Or maybe that's it. It was in the right. It wasn't real, but it was in the musical and then in the film, and the same with the calendar, so the audience could follow along. Like this conversation taking place on June 7th, so the audience like, okay, well, we still got a few weeks here.
Like, it's not happening yet. I can go take a whiz and get another beer on my way back to my seat.
Yeah, I don't have June 7th off, so I got a little longer to go in this play.
So now it's time for Dickinson to try to figure out how to delay things, and he proposes that any vote in favor of independence must be unanimous. Judge Wilson immediately stands up and seconds,
right,
and just gets stared at again. You can't do that. It's got to be a different state.
Did he say something like, "Oh my God"? It's very embarrassing.
Yes, he's very embarrassed. He did it again. Did it twice in 5 minutes. Adams whines that no other vote has to be unanimous. And Dickinson insists this one does, so that, quote, no colony be torn from its mother country without its consent.
Delaware seconds, Mr. President. No vote has ever had to be unanimous, Dickinson, and you know it.
Yes, but this one must be.
On what grounds?
that no colony be torn from its mother country without its own consent.
Hear, hear.
It will never be unanimous, damn it.
If you say so, Mr. Adams.
You say so.
So the vote is tied at 6, with New York abstaining
Courteously.
So Hancock has to break the tie.
Mr. Secretary, New York abstains. Courteously.
Mr. Morris. Why does New York constantly abstain? Why does New York simply stay in New York? Very well, the vote is tied. The principles of independence have no greater advocate in Congress than its president. And that is why I must join those who vote for unanimity.
Good God, John, what are you doing? You've sunk us!
Now hear me out. Don't you see that any colony who opposes independence will be forced to fight on the side of England?
What the hell
That we'll be setting brother against brother. That our new nation will carry as its emblem the mark of Cain. I can see no other way. Either we all walk together, or together we must stay where we are.
So Adams is trying to figure out a stall again. Secretary goes to read it again and gets interrupted again. He goes, "Oh, for heaven's sake, let me get through it once."
He's very disappointed.
And Adams requests a postponement because they can't vote on independence without a formal declaration. Somebody says to him, "We know though." Oh, he says, "Adam, without a formal declaration, they need to mark down their grievances." Somebody's like, "We know those, don't we?" And he's, "Oh goodness, we know." Oh.
We know.
So now Jefferson has been sitting in the window picking his ass this whole time. And when Adams is asked what the declaration would say, Jefferson rises and says,
Come now, Mr. Adams. You'll have to do better than that. Answer straight. What would be its purpose?
Yes. Well,
To place before mankind the common sense of the subject in terms so plain and firm as to command their assent.
and then I like this, he looks at John and winks. Like, I just saved your ass. So, like every good bureaucracy, now they have to form a committee.
Yes, gotta have
They need a committee to write it. And they get all the members down, and they want Richard Henry Lee, because he proposed to be on the committee, and he says, "Oh, I'm off to be governor." Instead, they're going to make Thomas Jefferson do it.
So you see Ben Franklin, he's actually he's pointing to John Adams. Like, he's like, "Look here, Jefferson. And we must have a Virginia, and Mr. Jefferson." And Jefferson immediately objects because he wants to go home and get laid.
Yep. He says, "I burn." John, so do, and then Adams says, "So do I."
Mr. A.
Mr. A. He goes, "Oh, as do I, Mr. J." Like, you?
Yeah, John, you have sex.
You have sex? He's like, "Yeah, I got like 8 kids with the shits back in Braintree to prove it." So anyway, then the members of the committee go out into the hallway and sing "But Mr. Adams."
Yes. A catchy tune, a fun tune.
It is.
And Jefferson ends up with the quill pen in his hand.
So then we see him sitting in his house some morning, and you get the impression it's the next day, but it's not. They gave him a whole week to work on it, and he's been wadding up paper and throwing it all over.
Yeah, Adams and Franklin approach, and they hear a violin playing.
Jefferson! What is that racket?
Latest thing from Europe, John. It's called music.
I came here hoping to hear a pen scratching, not a bow.
So they walk in and they just see the piles of stuff. And Adam's like, "Do you mean to say it's not yet finished?" Jefferson says, "I mean to say it's not yet started."
Yeah. No, sir.
Although when asked where it is, he's got the bow in his hand. He's just pointing at piles of paper. There and there and there. And there.
Did bows have a pointy end back in the day? Because he uses it like a garbage, like a pick up a cartridge, stabs through. It was through why it was a weapon. That bow.
Adams and Jefferson start arguing, and Adams like, "The world," it says, "it's been a week. The world was created in a week." Jefferson says to Adams, "Someday you must tell me how you did it."
Disgusting.
And Franklin has fallen asleep in the bed.
Yeah.
Like 3 minutes, he's out like a light.
Yep.
Adams goes over to wake him up, and a comely young woman walks in the door. And it turns out Adams has sent for Martha Jefferson. And he goes to she goes over to Thomas and they start making out. Adams walks up, tries to introduce himself, and she's not paying any attention. And while he's kind of stammering, he points to Dr. Franklin, the inventor of the stove.
Right, they're lip locked.
So there's a couple of things about this. There's a good chance that Gwyneth Paltrow is in this movie.
Oh, was Blythe Danner pregnant?
A little less than 9 months after she filmed the movie, she had little Gwyneth.
Ooh, she should get a credit then in residuals. Yes.
And in reality, they did not send for Martha.
No.
Martha had a miscarriage and was suffering still from gestational diabetes and was not fit to travel.
Yes.
That would have made for a much less... The musical number coming up next would have been really, really awkward.
It would have been a little sad. Yeah, it would have been a little awkward. Blythe Danner was not in the original musical production. She's one of the actors that did not come over from the musical. Do you know who was who played Martha in the musical?
Julie Andrews.
We have a Julie Andrews connection later, as you know.
I remember
Betty
Betty Buckley. Okay, no, that's not the fact I was thinking. Okay. So anyway, Franklin takes the hint and kind of ushers Adams out of the building.
Yeah.
And Adams is like, and then when Jefferson walks over and looks at him and slams the door shut, and Adams is like, "You don't mean they're going to in the middle of the day?" Not everyone's from Boston, John.
Not everyone's from Boston, John. Great line.
Then we get Vaseline on the lens again.
All right.
And there's Abigail, and she asks a pretty good question. If you were sending for wives, John, why didn't you send for your own? And then he goes through this whole tortured thing about how Martha is scrawny and not as,
Right. The winters are softer. But of course, he didn't send for her because nobody sent for Martha either. None of the wives were sent for.
That's right. So the next morning, Franklin walks up and John is sleeping on the stairs.
Yeah, and I think the fair point here is we learned John is quite lonely though, right? Because as he and Franklin depart Jefferson and Martha, he kind of says, what do you do for dinner?
And they want to go to a bunch of grapes or whatever it was called.
Yeah, they have fresh turkey. I hear the fresh turkey, a bunch of grapes.
But
Bible rendezvous, John.
Franklin's got a whore to go take care of, so he's not waiting.
I'd invite you along, but talking makes her nervous. So yeah, he sleeps outside on the steps, very, very lonely, missing his wife. Got nothing to do, and Franklin comes by the next morning.
And they look up, and Martha has thrown the shutters open.
Oh, John, look at her. Just look at her.
Oh, I am.
She's even more magnificent than I remember. Of course, we didn't see much of her front last night. Good morrow, madam.
Good morrow.
Is it the habit in Philadelphia for strangers to shout at ladies from the street?
Not really, but...
And for men of your age, it is not only unseemly, it is unsightly.
Excuse me, madam, but we met last evening.
I spoke to no one last evening.
Indeed, you did not. Nonetheless, we did present ourselves. This is Mr. John Adams. I am Dr. Benjamin Franklin, the inventor of the stove.
Yes.
And looks down and sees these two old creeps standing on the street. Do you always make a habit of lingering outside of windows?
Yeah.
And they tell her that they met her the night before. And she's like, no, I didn't. I didn't meet anybody. And he's like, I'm Dr. Franklin, inventor of the stove.
All the things, too. They keep going to the stove. Okay, yeah. There's other things that are maybe more impressive than that, but all right.
She agrees. Thomas is still asleep, so she's I'll come down. She's going to come down and talk to him. And then they have a good conversation while she's coming down the stairs about the history books. And Adams actually said this.
Well, no wonder the man couldn't write. Who could think of independence married to her?
I feel an absolute fool.
That's good for you, John.
I tell you, Franklin, it's positively indecent.
John, they're young and they're in love.
Not them, Franklin, us. Standing down here waiting for them to, Well, what will people think?
Don't worry, John. The history books will clean it up.
Well, it doesn't matter. I'll not appear in the history books anyway. Only you. Franklin did this, and Franklin did that, and Franklin did some other damn thing. Franklin smote the ground, and out sprang George Washington, fully grown and on his horse. Franklin then electrified him with his miraculous lightning rod, and the three of them, Franklin, Washington, and the horse, conducted the entire revolution all by themselves.
I like it.
I like it.
I like it.
So then my wife had come down last night while I was rewatching this, and she's like, "Ooh, have they done the plays the violin song yet?" It's about to come up. And she said she stuck around till it was on. I was like, "Okay, that's great." But they do that song where they get to dance with Blythe Danner, and
yeah, that's a song for me. That's the song that sticks in your head for a few days afterwards.
He plays the violin. He tucks it right under his chin. And he bows, oh, he bows. For he knows, yes, he knows, that it's high, 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 diddle, diddle, twixt my heart, Tom, and his fiddle. My strings are unstrung. High, 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 high. I am undone.
so they finished dancing around, and then she heads back up the stairs, and Jefferson leads her back into the building, and then he comes back out and he drops a note and says he's taking her back to bed. And Franklin goes, "I should have written it. At my age," or he's talking about the Declaration. "I should have written it. At my age, there's no doubt the pen is mightier than the sword."
Yeah. Which, yeah, the New York audience would have loved that line for sure.
So they head back to Congress, and McKean is back. He says Rodney's in terrible shape. He might never leave home again for 8 years.
Terrible shape. Not for 8 more years.
So Adams tells McKean he's got to work on Reed so they can get Delaware to vote for independence. McKean shakes his gun and says, "This'll break the tie." And then you just hear him arguing. And this is the second one of these we've done where we've had this line. "Damn your eyes, Reed. You come into this world blind and you're determined to leave it the same way, you slimy worm." So we got "Damn Your Eyes" in Young Frankenstein and in 1776.
That should be our criteria. If someone says "Damn your eyes," that means we need to do a deep dive on it.
So now Adams he's sending people out to, work on the ones who are against it.
Right.
And he says he's going to talk to old Bacon Face. He goes to talk to him. Early in the production, Chase has got stuck in a chair. Now the actor playing him is not that fat.
No.
But
he's fat, but he's not that fat.
Yeah. I mean, he had to pretend that he wasn't really stuck in the chair. It was acting.
Gotcha.
And you can kind of see it's like, why can't you just get up? I mean, we can see space there. Maybe somebody build a smaller chair so he can actually get stuck in it.
Costs too much.
While they're working on that, another report arrives from the general. And among the things we learn is how poorly disciplined the soldiers are, how ineffective the leaders are, and that there's an outbreak of the French disease. So that was Charles Thompson. It says, in the dispatch read by Congressional Secretary Charles Thompson, General Washington complains about soldiers suffering from the French disease, which is a common term for syphilis in English-speaking countries. Virtually every country in the 16th century, from the 16th century onward, called syphilis after someone else's nationality. Example, the Spanish disease, the Italian disease, the Dutch disease. Ironically, it most likely originated in the Caribbean, with Christopher Columbus's sailors introducing it to Europe in 1493.
Oh my.
So anyway, so he's talking about the bad stuff's going on in New Brunswick. And Hancock looks at Adams and says, "Well, John, you're the head of the War Committee. Are you up for some whoring, drinking, deserting in New Brunswick?" And Reverend Witherspoon goes, "There must be some mistake. I have an aunt in New Brunswick." Dickinson yells, "You must tell her to keep up the good work." Dickinson gets a lot of good lines in this.
Yeah, he does.
Anyway, Adams convinces Chase to go to New Brunswick with him and check out the troops.
Yeah, he goes, "Franklin, we're going to New Jersey." Like hell, I am. What for? I think it's McNair goes, "The drinking and the whoring,"
and he doesn't say a word. He just goes.
Boom, he's up and gone. Perfect.
So then, most of those voting for independence are gone. They're off doing things, which leaves all the other guys.
The South.
Which leads to the musical number "Cool, Cool, Conservative Men."
Yes.
Now this.
Do you know the story behind this?
Yes.
Behind this number.
Do you want to tell it, or do you want me to tell it?
Well, go ahead. I'll chime in.
Well, when this movie originally came out, this song was not in it.
That's right.
Because Peter Hunt and the writer Peter Stone said in the DVD commentary that the President of the United States at the time, Richard Nixon, was given a private screening of the movie before its release in 1972 by his friend, producer Jack Warner. The claim further goes on that the song "Cool, Cool, Considerate Men" offended Nixon. He thought audiences would take it as a criticism of his presidency, even though the film was set 2 centuries earlier. So Warner removed it at Nixon's request. However, documents from the Nixon Library, which lists all the movies viewed at the White House at the time, shows that 1776 was never previewed there. However, the documents do show that Nixon family was given a performance of the stage play in February of 1970. And this may have been the cause of confusion about a private screening, because the song is in there, so he would have heard it.
Interesting, yeah, because they definitely after it won the Tony for Best Musical, they did absolutely do a performance at the White House, and William Safire wanted a couple songs cut before that performance, including "Cool, Cool, Considerate Men," but they did it anyway, and Nixon evidently loved it at that time, and then yes, when it was becoming a film, someone must have gotten if they didn't actually do a screening, that's interesting, at the White House, someone must have gotten a Nixon because Nixon's called up his old friend Jack Warner and, "Yeah, could you do me a favor, Jack?" And Jack said, "Anything for you, Mr. President. And can you cut that number?" Which he did, and then Jack Warner then said he destroyed all of the prints of that number so that he couldn't be second guessed, which he had done before, I believe, in a production of My Fair Lady or Camelot. He had destroyed another number, and he didn't want to be proven wrong. He didn't want that number found, and for himself to look bad for striking it. I got a Jack Warner story for you. Do you want to hear that?
Let's hear it.
Okay. I have to give due credit to this. This is from Deadline's Strike Talk podcast by Billy Ray and Todd Gardner. If anybody's interested in listening to the Writers Guild and likely the SAG-AFTRA will be on strike against the AMPTP, you should listen to that podcast. But the story of Jack Warner is this: in 1942, shortly after Pearl Harbor, there's a lot of fear that California, specifically Los Angeles, would be the next bombing target of the Japanese. And things were going great for Warner Brothers. He had Porky Pig going. Warner Brothers Studios was doing real well. And very close to where the Warner Brothers lot, there was a Lockheed plant. And the Lockheed plant would have been the target for the Japanese as it was building fighters and bombers for the war effort. And someone informed Jack that from the sky, the roof of the Lockheed plant looked very similar to the sound stages on the Warner lot. And so as the story goes, Warner had painters go up on the roof of the sound stages and point a 20-foot arrow in the direction of Lockheed with the words under it, "Lockheed that away." This is evidently a true story. So the War Department eventually made him repaint his roof, but that's what happened. Jack on his deathbed, evidently not maybe the most popular man, was asked by what's described as his only living friend at that moment if he had any regrets. And he said something like, nah, although I wish I didn't listen to that idiot Nixon. And that was thought to mean about cutting cool conservative men from the film. Peter Hunt, the director, searched the archives. They found, as he suspected, not all of the copies were destroyed, and he was able to resurrect that cool conservative men, and is inserted now into the version of the movie that you will see today.
So that story brings to mind two things. Number one, Billy Ray is on the most recent Press Box podcast with Brian Curtis, because it's the 20th anniversary of the movie Shattered Glass.
Oh, okay, cool.
Which is a really good movie. And if you ever want to see Hayden Christensen actually be a good actor, because you don't get it in any of the Star Wars stuff.
Star Wars stuff, yeah.
She's very good in Shattered Glass. And Billy even has in the podcast talks about, he asked him, because he's like, he's working with Hayden. He's like, Hayden's a good actor. He's kind of like, he goes up to him and he's like, so what goes on with Star Wars? And he's like, honestly, he said, I think we've had to we've had to re-loop dialogue because you could hear George rustling his newspaper while we were trying to act. Not getting a lot of direction from. Even Carrie Fisher always said that George only knew his only direction was faster and more energy.
Great.
That was all he could ever. That's the only input he could ever have.
Oh, awesome.
But anyway, so there's that, and then that story though reminds me of a Glenn Beckert story about Ron Santo.
Okay.
Ron said something. I should go back and look at what he actually said. That offended the people of Montreal. And they were going to Montreal to play the Expos, and Ron got death threats. And Beckert, I'm sure it was just bullshit. It was just a funny joke to tell at the Cub convention. Said that he was his roommate, and so he hung a sheet in the window with an arrow and said Ron Santo's bet. He wanted to make sure they didn't accidentally shoot him.
Oh, that's great.
I sing Hosanna, Hosanna, in a sane and lucid manner. We are cool. We're the cool, considering men, whose life may never ever be seen again. With a land, cash in hand, self-command, future plan, and we'll hold to our goal, a mission that is old, we must be bold.
So in the scene before, there's dialogue that kind of goes around cool conservative men. And one quote, which is from Dickinson, which you talk about things that are still true. He says, most men with nothing would rather protect the possibility of becoming rich instead of accepting the reality of being poor. It's all those people who vote for one party that do nothing to look out for their best interests.
Rings true.
And then after they sing and head down they all get in their little, wagon or whatever their carriages and head
fancy
off.
Things, yeah.
McNair looks at the courier and goes, "How'd you like to try to borrow $1 from one of them?"
That's a great line. McNair's a riot.
So they go back in, and now it's just McNair and the courier, and then some other an unpaid intern. But he asks the courier if he's seen any fighting, and the courier just tells the story. He's got this weird grin on his face.
Yeah.
That his two best friends were shot and killed at Lexington and Concord. And that leads to the depressing song, Mama Look Sharp.
Yeah, very depressing song.
Yes.
Mama, hey mama, look sharp, here I be. Hey, hey, mama, look sharp.
So now we go back and the declaration is done, and Thompson is reading it into the record.
Looks like Jefferson's getting laid.
And Adams and Franklin have returned with good news. When they took Chase off to check on the troops. He was fascinated by the shooting prowess of a militia who hadn't eaten in weeks. All of a sudden saw a bunch of ducks, and he thinks everybody there is a crack shot. So now he's at the Maryland Assembly convincing them to vote for independence. So now there's optimism, and that leads to the song "The Egg," where and one of the dialogue is there, or in the song, "What sort of bird shall we choose as a symbol of our new country?" And Adams wants the eagle, Jefferson wants the dove, and Franklin wants the turkey. It's a uniquely American bird that's full of courage.
The turkey.
So the song ends, they go back in, the Declaration has been read, and now they ask if anybody has any changes. And everybody has lots of changes, but the first one is, as McKean goes, it's a bonny document you got there. But he asked for them to cut out a thing about Scottish mercenaries, who he claims were more likely Germans in disguise. Witherspoon wants mention of the divine being, and a bunch of people are throwing out changes, and Jefferson's like, fine, whatever. Just keeps telling, do whatever, I don't care. Yeah. Finally, Adams yells,
"This is a revolution, damn it! We're going to have to offend somebody."
Dickinson wants to know. He asks Jefferson why he refers to King George as a tyrant. He's like, because he is a tyrant. He says, I remind you that tyrant is still your king. Because when a king becomes a tyrant, he thereby breaks the contract binding his subjects to him. He's like, well, how so? By taking away their rights. Rights that came from him in the first place? All except one, the right to be free comes from nature. He goes, and are we not free, Mr. Jefferson? Homes entered without warrant, citizens arrested without charge, and in many cases, freedom of assembly denied. He goes, no one approves of such things, but these are dangerous times. And then Franklin says,
be careful, Mr. Dickinson. Those who give up some of their liberty in order to obtain a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety.
One of his more famous quotes.
So then Adams asks Judge Wilson, Dickinson asks him, Mr. Wilson, do we consider King George a tyrant? And Wilson's like, well, no, we don't consider him a tyrant in Pennsylvania.
Odd that, by the way, that this is all taking place in Philadelphia, and the Pennsylvania delegation is anti-revolution.
Yeah. Jefferson pushes back on removing the references of tyrant.
The king is a tyrant, whether we say so or not. We might as well say so.
But I already scratched it out.
Then scratch it back in.
Put it back, Mr. Thompson. The king will remain a tyrant.
And Adams defends the document as, quote, a masterful expression of the American mind. Yeah. And Rutledge stands up and he wants them to read back a portion of the Declaration dealing with slavery, which he refers to as our peculiar institution. And he argues that slaves are not people but property, and certainly not Americans. And Jefferson says they are people and they are here. And he says he's already resolved to release his slaves. During the debate on the slavery clause, the Declaration of Independence, Jefferson tells John Dickinson he has already resolved to free his own slaves. In fact, Thomas Jefferson only freed 2 slaves during his lifetime and 5 slaves in his will. Most of the 200 remaining slaves were sold upon his death.
No.
That's when Rutledge gets up and gets his big musical number.
Yes.
Molasses to rum to slaves.
Which he sings very brilliantly.
Yeah, that's a great.
It's like if you're wondering why did they cast this 80-year-old guy to be the youngest man in Congress? Oh, it's because he could do this number really well.
Molasses to rum to slaves, 'tisn't morals, 'tis money that saves. Shall we dance to the sound of the profitable pound in molasses and rum and slaves? Who sail the ships out of Guinea, laden with Bibles and slaves? 'tis Boston can boast to the West Indies coast. Jamaica, we brung what she craves. Antigua, Barbados, we brung Bibles and slaves.
End of the song, the South all leave.
They're out.
Chase comes running in as they're leaving, and he's got a signed document from the Maryland Assembly to vote for independence.
Yes. And Chase, not able to read the room at all, doesn't notice that half of it's gone.
No.
But he's still giddy with excitement.
But Dickinson is walking out, and he's very excited.
I thought... You'll have to forgive them, Mr. Chase. They've just suffered a slight setback. And after all, what is a man profited if he shall gain Maryland and lose the entire South?
Adams tells McCain to go get Rodney. McCain says, it's 80 miles and he's a dying man. And Adams says, no, he's a patriot. And he's got a good 8 years left.
Yeah.
At least. So everybody but Adams is consigned to defeat. Franklin tells Adams, we have no choice, John. The slavery portion has to go. Yeah. It's a luxury we can't afford.
A luxury? 500,000 souls in chains. And Dr. Franklin calls it a luxury. Maybe you should have walked out with the South.
You forget yourself, sir. I founded the first anti-slavery society on this continent.
Oh, don't wave your credentials at me. Perhaps it's time you had them renewed.
The issue here is independence. Perhaps you've forgotten that fact, but I have not. How dare you jeopardize our cause when we've come so far? These men, no matter how much we may disagree with them, are not ribbon clerks to be ordered about. They're proud, accomplished men, the cream of their colonies. And whether you like it or not, they and the people they represent will be part of this new nation you'd hope to create. Now either learn how to live with them or pack up and go home.
In any case, stop acting like a Boston fishwife.
Yeah, Boston fishwife.
Don't know what a Boston fishwife is, but apparently not good.
Evidently not a good thing.
So anyway, Adams goes back up to the bell tower, uses the force to talk to Abigail. Smear the Vaseline on the lens again.
Right. And an interesting thing, Hayden Christensen comes up.
Yeah, that's right.
Instead of Abigail.
And Yoda. You see Yoda over there too.
Right. Like, what the hell happened?
Adam is going on and complaining about his inadequacies and how he's failed and blah, blah, blah. And she says to him, do you think so little of yourself and so little of me that you think I would marry a man like that?
Like, would I marry a loser like you if you were that much of a loser?
So his imaginary force call gets interrupted when McNair comes up and tells him he has a delivery. And he goes down all the steps and he looks, and what is laying there?
Oh,
barrels full of saltpeter.
Yes.
Old Abby came through.
What are in these kegs, madam?
So then
saltpeter, John.
So he tells McNair to buy every pin in Philadelphia. It's like, Jesus, you could have gone on this weeks ago. Just now you're finally going to get around to the pins?
McNair's like, what kind of pins? He's like,
So
I don't know.
he comes up with a plan for Jefferson and Franklin to get to work. He sends Jefferson to talk to Rutledge and Franklin to talk to Wilson. And he talks to Hancock.
I'm still from Massachusetts, John. You know where I stand. I'll do whatever you say.
No. No, you're the president of Congress. You're a fair man, Hancock. Stay that way.
You're a fair man, Hancock.
So Adams asks Thompson if he stands with Dickinson or him. And he goes, I stand with the general. Lately, I have the oddest feeling that he's been writing to me. And then there's the song, Is Anybody There? Which is a good song.
Yeah.
They want me to quit. They say, John, give up the fight. Still to England I say, good night, forever, good night. For I have crossed the Rubicon. Let the bridge be burned behind me. Come what may, come what may. Commitment!
So it's late. Adams is the only one there. Dr. Hall wanders in, says he can't sleep. He's trying to resolve a dilemma.
I'm sorry if I startled you. I couldn't sleep. And in trying to resolve my dilemma, I remembered something I'd once read. That a representative owes the people not only his industry, but his judgment. And he betrays them if he sacrifices it to their opinion. That was written by Edmund Burke, a member of the British Parliament.
Then he walks up to the board and he dramatically changes George's vote from nay to yay. And they're still going to lose. So the next morning is July 2nd. Hancock calls the vote. McKean and Rodney come in and they're just covered with mud and horse shit.
Yeah,
and it's just
80 miles of dull on them.
Says the secretary will call the roll, and I remind you that a single nay vote will fail the resolution. New York abstains courteously. They go to Pennsylvania, and Dickinson's all ready to shoot it down. Franklin and Wilson are talking, and Franklin passes. So he's got to come back to us. And with Caesar and McKean back, Caesar gets up.
Delaware.
Just a moment.
Delaware, by majority vote,
Aye.
says yay.
He's barely shaking as he stands. This is a man with only 8 more years to live.
2,500 days left.
His heroism, spending these last few precious hours in Congress.
North Carolina yields to South Carolina. Rutledge tells Adams he will sink it unless they remove the offending passage from the resolution.
Did that, we would be guilty of what we ourselves are rebelling against.
Nevertheless, remove it, or South Carolina will bury, now and forever, your dream of independence.
John, I beg you consider what you're doing.
Mark me, Franklin. If we give in on this issue, posterity will never forgive us.
That's probably true, but we won't hear a thing. We'll be long gone. Besides, what will posterity think we were? Demigods? We're men, no more, no less, trying to get a nation started against greater odds than a more generous God would have allowed. First things first, John. Independence, America. If we don't secure that, what difference will the rest make?
Adams looks at Thomas and goes, Jefferson, say something.
What else is there to do?
Well, man, you're the one that wrote it.
I wrote all of it, Mr. Adams.
Jefferson goes up to the desk, takes the little feather, and scratches out the part about slavery. And Adams takes the document and shoves it in Rutledge's face and says, you have your slavery, what good it may do you. So South Carolina says yay, and then North Carolina says yay.
Right.
So it goes back to Pennsylvania, and Dickinson is the one doing all the talking.
Bill Hartman.
Mr. President, Pennsylvania regrets all of the inconvenience that such distinguished men as Adams, Franklin, and Jefferson were put to just now. They might have kept their document intact for all the difference it will make. Mr. President, Pennsylvania says...
Just a moment.
And Franklin says, just a minute. I'd like to poll the delegation.
I ask the delegation be polled.
Oh, Dr. Franklin, don't be absurd.
A poll, Mr. President. It's a proper request.
Yes, it is. Poll the delegation, Mr. Thompson.
Dr. Benjamin Franklin.
Yea.
Mr. John Dickinson.
Nay.
Mr. James Wilson. George Wilson.
There it is, Mr. Wilson. It's all up to you now. The whole question of American independence rests squarely on your shoulders. An entirely new nation, ready to be born or to die at birth, all on your say-so. Which will it be, Mr. Wilson? Every map maker in the world is waiting for your decision.
Oh, come now, James. Nothing has changed. Oh, we mustn't let Dr. Franklin create one of his confusions. The question is clear.
And then Judge Wilson just kind of sits there, like David Ross trying to figure out what to do with the bullpen. Dickinson's like, come now, James. Nothing has changed. We mustn't let Dr. Franklin create one of his confusions.
Most questions are clear when someone else has to decide them.
It would be a pity for a man who's handed down hundreds of wise decisions from the bench to be remembered only for the one unwise decision he made in Congress.
James, you're keeping everybody waiting.
Because James is very Judge Smales.
Yeah.
James, you're keeping well, we're waiting.
Let's build up on these shoes, James. What that waste your thoughts?
Gambling is illegal in Congress. Besides, I never slice. The secretary has called for your vote. I've sent men younger than you to the gas chamber. Didn't want to do it. Felt I owed it to them.
The secretary has called for your vote.
Please. Don't push me, John. I know what you want me to do. But Mr. Adams is correct about one thing. I'm the one who'll be remembered for it.
At least if they ever write a musical and they fictionalize the way we all vote at the end.
Right, because this lovely story we just talked about never happened, but it works great in the play.
What do you mean?
I'm different from you, John. I'm different from most of the men here. I don't want to be remembered. I just don't want the responsibility.
Yes, well, whether you want it or not, James, there's no way of avoiding it.
Not necessarily, John. If I go with them, I'll just be one among dozens. No one will ever remember the name of James Wilson. But if I vote with you, I'll be the man who prevented American independence. I'm sorry, John. I just didn't bargain for that.
And is that how new nations are formed? By a non-entity trying to preserve the anonymity he so richly deserves?
Revolutions come into this world like bastard children, Mr. Dickinson. Half improvised and half compromised. Our side has provided the compromise. Now Judge Wilson is supplying the rest.
James.
I'm sorry, John. My vote is yay.
Mr. Secretary, Pennsylvania says yay.
James, Lauren wants to see you now.
I like the way Thompson says this.
The count, being 12-0, with one abstention, the resolution on independence is adopted.
The resolution on independence is adopted?
Adopted.
Adams, it's done. It's done.
Yeah.
It's done. It's done.
So Hancock asks for the declaration to be prepared to be signed, and he rules that for their mutual protection, no man be allowed to remain in Congress without attaching his name to it. And Dickinson...
I'm sorry, Mr. President. I cannot, in good conscience, sign such a document. I will never stop hoping for our eventual reconciliation with England. But because, in my own way, I regard America no less than does Mr. Adams, I will join the army and fight in her defense, even though I believe that fight to be hopeless. Goodbye, gentlemen.
And on his way out...
I love this, yeah.
Gentlemen of the Congress, I say ye John Dickinson.
And then they all hit their hockey sticks on the ice.
Yeah. I say ye...
To recognize him.
Nice moment. Dixon serves as a brigadier general, and I believe is ironically, only one of 2 members of the Congress to actually fight. And he was vehemently opposed to it. So, good for you, John.
So now it's July 3rd. Hancock asks if anyone has any objection to signing the Declaration as written.
I have one.
Adams and Jefferson argue over the word inalienable or unalienable. Adams says, I'm a Harvard graduate.
Ooh.
And Jefferson says, I happen to have graduated from William and Mary.
No.
He goes, so after they keep arguing, Hancock finally goes, he says to Jefferson, will you cede to Mr. Adams' objection? Jefferson says, I will not. And Adams like, it's fine. I'll speak to the printer about it later. And in the document, it says unalienable. So maybe he actually did go talk to the printer.
That's one of the things that actually they talked about in writing that was printers did, the printer would have been supervised by a member of the committee, and it's so they kind of surmise it could be very likely that John Adams had this dialogue. They don't know if this dialogue actually took place, but it might make sense that John wanted to change it, had this dialogue, was rebuffed, and then just told the printer to do it.
So they hand Hancock the final draft so that it can start to be signed.
Very well, gentlemen. We are about to brave the storm in a skiff made of paper. And how it shall end, God only knows.
And he signs it just the way they signed it on the Hancock building.
Right.
That's a pretty large signature, Johnny.
So Fat George in London can read it without his glasses.
All right, step right up, gentlemen. Don't miss your chance to commit treason.
Hancock is right. This paper is our passport to the gallows. But there's no backing out now. For if we do not hang together, we shall most assuredly hang separately.
The best thing is he's laughing, and you could see Wilson sitting next to him, and he's terrified. He's like, oh, shit.
Yeah, fuck.
And so they're just milling around talking. Nobody's doing anything, and Hancock yells,
Gentlemen, forgive me if I don't join in the merriment, but if we are arrested now, my name is still the only one on the damn thing!
And we get one last dispatch from G. Washington.
From the Commander, Army of the United Colonies in... Army of the United States. In New York, dispatch number 1209 to the Honorable Congress, John Hancock, President. Dear Sir, I can now report with some certainty that the eve of battle is near at hand. Toward this end, I have ordered the evacuation of Manhattan and directed our defenses to take up stronger positions on the Brooklyn Heights. At the present time, my forces consist entirely of Hazlitt's Delaware Militia and Smallwood's Marylanders, a total of 5,000 troops to stand against 25,000 of the enemy. And I begin to notice that many of us are lads under 15 and old men, none of whom could truly be called soldiers. One personal note to Mr. Lewis Morris of New York. I must regretfully report that his estates have been totally destroyed, but that I have taken the liberty of transporting Mrs. Morris and 8 of the children to Connecticut in safety. The 4 older boys are now enlisted in the Continental Army. As I write these words, the enemy is plainly in sight beyond the river. How it will end, only Providence can direct. But dear God, what brave men I shall lose before this business ends. Your obedient G. Washington.
Yeah, and they always say there's always the drum roll. Yours obedient. G. Washington.
McNair goes up and he changes his calendar to July 4th. Hancock sends him up to go ring the bell. And Lewis Morris rises and says,
Mr. President?
Mr. Morris?
To hell with New York. I'll sign it anyway.
Thank you, Mr. Morris.
I didn't write it down, but they ask him what the hell goes on in the New York legislature.
Yes.
He's like, I don't know if you've ever been to a session of the New York legislature, but everyone talks very loud and no one listens to anyone else, and then nothing gets done.
Which would have been, again, very funny to a Broadway audience in 1960, 1970, and 71.
So Hopkins is standing right next to the desk, and Hancock is like, back off, Steve, what the fuck?
Yeah.
And he goes, I want to remember each man's face as he signs. And then we get the dramatic, the music, and you see everyone come up one at a time, and they start, after they sign, they take their position so that they're basically where, in the famous painting, they're all standing. And it says, the final shot required the camera to pull back to show the entire congressional chamber. However, there wasn't enough room on set for the camera truck to pull back. Since the sound stages being used were slated to be demolished after production, and this was the final shot, a large hole was made in the wall with the camera truck protruding outdoors after pulling all the way back. As it turned out, the sound stages were never demolished and the wall was rebuilt.
Huh. That's cool.
The original Broadway production opened at the 46th Street Theater on March 16, 1969, and ran for 1,217 performances. It won Tony Awards for Best Musical, Best Featured Actor, William Henry Lee, Ron Holgate, right. Best Director, Peter Hunt, and was nominated for Best Featured Actress in a Musical, Virginia Vesthoff. She was Abigail. Yes. And Best Scenic Design. William Daniels was nominated for his role as John Adams, and Best Featured Actor was declined because he felt Adams was a leading role. So leading, featured, and then supporting, I guess.
You were correct about that, yeah.
William Daniels, Howard Da Silva, Ken Howard, Roy Poole, Virginia Vesthoff, David Forn, Ron Holgate, William Duell, Ralston Hill, Jonathan Moore, and Charles Rule recreated their roles in the movie. William Daniels' wife, Bonnie Bartlett, is a distant relative of Josiah Bartlett, a member of the Continental Congress for New Hampshire. When John Hancock...
The ancestor to Jed.
Yep. Yes. When John Hancock calls Congress to order and Charles Thompson reads the roll, he mentions that, among others, John Adams' cousin, Sam, is absent. But the John Adams in the play is at times a composite of both John and Sam. So Sam is, in a way, present. William Daniels played John Adams. He played John Quincy Adams. He played Sam Adams. And in the TV show Boy Meets World, he played Mr. George Feeney, who was principal of John Adams High School in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania.
The man owes his career to the Adams family.
Blythe Danner played Martha Jefferson, the wife of Thomas Jefferson. In the movie Jefferson in Paris in 1995, her real-life daughter, Gwyneth Paltrow, played Patsy Jefferson, the daughter of Thomas Jefferson. Danner reprised her role as Martha in the documentary Thomas Jefferson in 1997, and Gwyneth played her role opposite Nick Nolte, who was being Thomas Jefferson. Nolte and Danner played husband and wife in The Prince of Tides in 1991.
Oh, his connections, yes. Howard Da Silva, I don't know if you're going to mention this, he was one of the actors who was blacklisted, and somewhat ironically, I guess 2 years later, he would play Nikita Khrushchev. In the 1974 movie, The Missiles of October.
A departure from history is that the separation of Great Britain was accomplished in 2 steps. The actual vote for independence came on July 2nd, with the approval of Lee's Resolution of Independence. The wording of the Declaration of Independence, the statement to the world as to the reasons necessitating the split, was then debated for 3 days before being approved on July 4th. The vote for independence did not hinge on passages being removed from the Declaration, since Congress had already voted in favor of independence. For the sake of drama, the play's authors combined the 2 events. In addition, some historians believe the Declaration was not signed on July 4th, but was instead signed on August 2nd, 1776. Others note the final copy of the document was signed by the delegates over several weeks and months, commencing in July and not completed until as late as September, to make for a super boring musical.
It'd be a lot of changing of the calendar.
James Wilson is portrayed as subordinating himself to Dickinson's opposition to independence, only changing his vote so that he would not be remembered unfavorably. In fact, Wilson was considered one of the leading thinkers behind the American cause, consistently supporting and arguing for independence, although he would not cast his vote until his district had been caucused.
Okay, much like the Georgia delegate.
Did Roger Ebert give a thumbs up or a thumbs down to 1776?
Well, I mean, it was panned. I mean, I shouldn't say that. It was a box office bomb. But Roger was pretty smart, so I'll say he gave it a thumbs up.
Well, he gave it 2 stars.
Ooh.
And declared, "This is an insult to the real men who are Adams, Jefferson, Franklin, and the rest. The performances trapped inside these roles, as you might expect, are fairly dreadful. There are good actors in the movie, especially William Daniels as Adams and Daniel Madden as John Dickinson, but they're forced to strut and posture so much that you wonder if they ever scratched or spit or anything. I can hardly bear to remember the songs, much less discuss them. Perhaps I shouldn't. It's just too damn bad this movie didn't take advantage of its right to the pursuit of happiness."
Oh, wow. Well, it was eloquent in his blasting of it, but one little irony about, one thing to point out about, we're talking about Jack Warner. Jack Warner was a founding father, if you will, of the AMPTP, which is the American Motion Picture and Television Producers. That is the organization that is currently in negotiations with SAG-AFTRA. That's the organization that the WJ is striking against, but currently negotiating with SAG-AFTRA. The first sole president of SAG-AFTRA, because remember the 2 unions merged many years ago. There used to be SAG and AFTRA separate. After they merged, it became SAG-AFTRA. The first president of SAG-AFTRA was Ken Howard.
Who would Trey Wilson have played in this movie?
There's a guy. So I have 2. It's a tie between 2 guys, and you could probably guess who they are. But I would say John Hancock and Stephen Hopkins. I think he'd be great.
Yeah, I think he'd be a great Hancock, because he has to be like exasperated a bunch at the people, and nobody did that better.
Hancock could be the bigger role, better role.
Who would you play?
Tough one, because I would probably, you know what, I'd play the other one. So I'd age myself up and play Stephen Hopkins of Rhode Island. How about yourself? I'd play John Hancock if the role wasn't taken, but since it's taken,
We cast Trey Wilson. I can't have that.
Right.
I'd be Thompson. I'd play.
Oh, that's a good call.
I'd constantly get annoyed by being interrupted. I'm trying to read the damn. Yeah, and it does have a Rotten Tomatoes score, 74.
That's pretty good. Pretty good.
Yeah, it was not a was not a box office winner.
No.
It did make it. It made its money back.
Nominations. Got 2 Oscar nominations. Lost for relatively minor category. Lost them both.
But there you go. So that was the 1972 musical 1776, which I'm sure people will be running out. I was able to stream it for free through Comcast. So
I got it free through Fubo.
So there you go.
So that's good. Yeah, and honor to see. Lest anyone accuse us of not being patriotic, we are doing this in honor of 4th of July.
That's right.
Coming up here. Good movie to watch over that weekend.
Even though I kept waiting for the aliens to show up and for Bill Pullman to be president, and it didn't happen.
Will Smith to come down and slap John Adams or something.
All right.
There it is.
Well, thanks, Mike.
Well, thank you.
Many of us have herpes.